African migratory bird species using technological innovations such as satellite telemetry, investigating how disturbances arising from human activities moderate the behavior of birds in the wild, as well as how urban landscape influence the ecology and composition of birds. He has collaborated with organizations, institutions nationally and internationally in the area of intra-African bird migration, promoting public appreciation of conservation of biodiversity and investigating the incidence of avian influenza in wild birds. His research work has given rise to numerous publications in national and international peer-reviewed journals, and many of these have been presented at national and international conferences, some of which he was co-symposium convener. He has also served as facilitator of several ecological and conservation trainings and workshops. We all know that Dr. Sholadoye Iwajomo is an ornithologist, and not just an ornithologist, is a passionate ornithologist and has raised several other ornithologists, including myself. He was this is not in what you wrote down, Dr. Ringim. I'm adding my own.
Yeah.
My lecturer has an AP11 Ornithological Research Institute, and he is a very passionate ornithologist. Thank you for raising people like us, Dr. Shola. He's an ecologist and a conservation biologist with over a decade experience in teaching, research, and administration. He continues to mentor students, like I said, both at the undergraduate and postgraduate level, both in Nigeria and all other places. He has raised giants. So we are really grateful, and we are honored to have you here, Dr. Kiri. And finally, he is a member of the board of trustee of sustainable and conservation education for rural areas. He's also a member of several professional associations, including SCB, NCF, Nigerian Conservation Foundation, African Bird Club, and many others. And we are happy to have you here. He is married and blessed with children. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation, Dr. Shola.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Raji, for reading the citation. I also attended his art class in Upload, so we have all benefited from his expertise. So the floor is yours, Dr. Shola.
Thank you so much. Slides. Thank you so much, Dr. Ringim and Dr. Raji. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present some bit of work that I have been doing. So I'm going to, okay, so now I'm a bit old school when it comes to using Google Meet. So don't mind me if is my screen, is it showing
yeah, I can see your screen from my end,
yeah,
and
but
I believe everyone can see it.
I want
it's
to get
showing,
it,
but it's not on the presenter mode.
Yes,
yeah,
so,
almost there. You just put it on the presenter mode,
and that's the difficulty I have.
So if you go at the bottom to your right, the first icon, bottom right.
Almost,
okay.
Yes.
Click on it. Yes.
All right, so you can see it clearly now.
Not yet.
Okay, so
click on it.
I'm clicking on it. I'm clicking
icon.
on it from the Google Meet, but it's not activating. It's not activating, so that's the problem I have. So
can you put your cursor on the icon?
Yes, I have done that. Still.
Does anyone in the meeting knows how we can present this in the presenter mode?
Hello.
Yes, Alex, go ahead, please.
Yes, you need to stop sharing and start sharing again. And you need to share your entire windows, not just the PowerPoint screen.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you,
thanks
Alex.
You're most welcome.
Thank you for that heads up. So I share the entire windows and not just okay, so sharing my entire windows. Okay, entire screen. Yeah.
Yes, your entire screen.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Okay, so I'm getting some pop-ups here. All right, so
okay. Yes, perfect.
please confirm. Okay.
Yeah, you can click on that hide. Click on hide.
So get rid of
you
that.
See hide, that icon hide. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
Please don't mind me. I'm a bit old school when it comes to Google Meet. I don't use it very often. So
yeah, most welcome.
Yeah. All right. So today I'll be talking about birds and urban landscapes. And I must say that this presentation is an aggregation of several research works that I have been part of. So permit me to start off by saying that this is not entirely my own personal research, but research of students that have co-supervised also, and research of colleagues that I have also been co-author on the papers. So I'll be using that to share the story about birds and urban landscapes. And the outline for my presentation as follows. We'll start off with a brief introduction and then look at the overview of urbanization and its impact on wildlife and how important is urban ecosystems, the effects of urbanization on bird communities, role of urban green spaces, and then we'll wrap up with the human activities and behavioral adaptations that occur. So by way of introduction, birds can be regarded as indicators of the state of health of the environment. And this is because, for one, birds are a taxa that are very well known, and there's quite a lot of research that has been done on birds. And this is also linked to the fact that they occupy or they occur in almost all ecosystems around the globe. And their distribution, their ecology is well known compared to other taxa. We know quite a lot about the sort of congruence that we have in distribution of birds relative to other taxa. So you can use birds as a way of representing other taxa because their distribution often overlaps with the distribution of many other taxa. Even when you look at endemic species or even important areas where you have birds, it's in many instances it overlaps with regions of the world where you have lots of or endemic taxa, different taxa that are endemic. And also in terms of monitoring, there's quite a lot of monitoring that has been ongoing for birds over centuries, and they are quite easy to detect, easy to count, and also relatively easy to identify. And that's partly because of their plumage characteristics, which makes them distinct. And as such, we can say that the movement of birds also often correlates quite strongly with environmental changes. So when you have changes in the environment, often you would find that numbers or distribution of birds are also changing. And because of this, birds are a very good taxa that we can use to tell the state of our environment. Now, urbanization, as we know, is the transformation of habitats into cities, into urban areas. And this is often associated with fragmentation of existing habitats. So natural habitats, natural forest habitats have fragmented in the process of urbanization. And worst still is the issue of habitat loss, where you have habitats completely transformed from the green vegetated areas into concrete jungles. So you now have situations where we have lots of concrete buildings taking the place of trees, urban infrastructure such as telecommunication masts, power lines, taking the place of trees and other vegetation. And as such, urbanization has been recorded as one of the major threats to wildlife. This is because of the associated changes in land use and land cover. And such, you have the implication is that you have species also, the distribution of species will change because their habitats are either lost or have become fragmented. And that would result in a whole different dynamics, lots of dynamics that you have, changes in the composition of species. So whereas some species would decline, some other species might thrive in this urban environment. And so you have the map there of just an aerial view of parts of Lagos, and you can see Lagos being one of the most densely populated parts of the country. You can see how the buildings and infrastructure has taken the place of green areas. And such, the few green areas that we have are mostly wetlands. So there are places that people cannot build. At least they cannot build there in the interim, and that is why they still look a bit green. So, but if you there are still some parts of Lagos which has some green areas, but relative to the entire land cover, you would say that that's really a small proportion. Now, in terms of urbanization and its effect on bird communities, we know that birds are important in urban areas, just like they are important in rural areas. So ecosystem processes like seed dispersal, pollination are strongly linked to pollinators like bird species. So without bird species, many of these ecosystem services cannot be delivered. So birds are important. Even in urban areas, you will find quite a lot of bird species that have become adapted to living in this environment. So you have some bird species that have now been classified as urban adapters. Some have been classified as urban exploiters. Now, within the urban systems, the accompanied changes that we have in vegetation cover and composition also impacts on the communities and the composition of birds that you will find. And the reason for this is that because we have a loss of vegetation cover, reduction in the coverage of vegetation cover, and then increase in concretes and built up areas, it therefore means that very few species will be able to thrive in such an environment. And those species that are able to succeed in thriving within the environment must be able to utilize all of the resources that the urban environment provides. So in urban environments, you have built-up areas, you have trees, you have relics of natural vegetation, and you have urban green spaces. All of these habitats must be a species that would thrive well in an urban environment must be able to cope with the resources and the challenges that accompany the process of urbanization. And one thing which we see in urban areas is the issue of food supplementation. So household waste, for example, household waste and landfills that we have in urban areas where waste are disposed of on a rich source of food for many bird species. And the consequence of that is that you have those species that have affinity for human settlements, the synanthropic species, their numbers increase in quite great magnitudes. Whereas other species that are very sensitive to habitat changes, their numbers will decrease. And as such, in urban areas, as urbanization progresses, you find that species richness tends to decrease, whereas abundance increases. And the reason for increase in abundance is the fact that very few species that are capable of exploiting the anthropogenic food sources, they make up the biomass of avian species within urban systems. And one other thing is that for many of these species also, they enjoy what we call a predator release, because the natural predators of these bird species are unavailable within the urban areas. And as such, their numbers can increase quite drastically. So you have bird species like sparrows that are capable of exploiting buildings, taking advantage of buildings and structures and artificial structures to lay their eggs, to raise their young. Their numbers increase. Whereas other species that are very sensitive, that require complex ecological vegetation communities would reduce in numbers. Now, within urban areas, just as we know that urbanization is a process that is ongoing. In fact, it has been estimated that by the year 2030, more than half of the entire global population of humans, so more than 50% of human population, will be living in cities. And that means that many of our now rural areas would have transformed into cities. And the reasons are not far-fetched, because everyone desires some amenities. So we all want to live a better life. The person living in the village wants access to internet, wants access to better healthcare, wants access to good roads. And all of these things, as good as they are, they come with their own challenges. And one of the challenges that you have, conversion of rural areas or natural areas into built-up environment. Now, within these urban areas, one of the things that we notice is that many tertiary institutions that are located within urban areas often have relics of natural vegetations. And the reason is because the management of these institutions have some sort of management system in place that helps to control urban intrusion. And as such, some natural vegetations can still be found in many of these natural and tertiary institutions. For example, here at the University of Lagos, along if you're driving on the Third Mainland Bridge, you would see this stretch of forest, mangrove forest, that lies along the coastal part of the university. So these are just relics, these are just remnants of the natural vegetation of this part of Lagos. You have mangroves, these are mangrove forests that we still have in this area. And as such, this kind of pattern is likely to influence bird species compared to the larger area of the urban settlement. And so one of the things that we started off trying to understand is how places in Lagos that have these patches or fragments of natural vegetation, how does this contribute to bird richness and the abundance of bird species? And in one of the studies that we published in 2018, we divided the entire campus into two categories of areas: low disturbance habitats and high disturbance habitats. And the low disturbance habitats are those areas where vehicular traffic is quite low. So we use vehicular traffic as a measure of disturbance. So if we measured the number of cars passing on the road within a minute, and where you have less than 10 cars passing in a minute, we categorize that as low disturbance area. And then those places that had high disturbance areas were those that had higher vehicular traffic of greater than 10 cars per minute. And what we found in this particular study was that density of buildings is an important factor influencing bird abundance. The density of buildings. And like I had mentioned before, as urbanization occurs, you have removal of natural vegetation and replacement with artificial structures, buildings taking the place. And many bird species are capable of exploiting, excuse me, many bird species are capable of exploiting these buildings. So you have bird species that nest on the ledges of buildings, just above the windows. You have bird species nesting there, some nesting in the roof, in the roof of buildings. So just because urbanization is taking place, it means that birds are also adjusting. What we see is that birds are adjusting, and as density of buildings increases in the low disturbance areas, that's low disturbance areas, in this case, the one in blue, that's habitat 2. Low disturbance areas are habitat 2, and high disturbance areas is habitat 1. And you can see that in low disturbance areas, you find that as number of buildings increases, the abundance of birds decreases. So which means that the birds are not the fact that you have lots of buildings, is not a strong does not impact on abundance in a way that it reduces it. So as the buildings increase, as number of buildings increase, you have fewer birds that you find. But in places that are high disturbance areas, you have, as number of buildings increases, you have a higher disturbance. So it means that the question here is that the implication here is that in these areas where you have low disturbance, where you have fewer cars, these are areas where you still have more trees. Many of these places you have tall trees. So in those areas, what is really influencing the abundance of birds is not the buildings themselves, but rather other landscape issues, parameters. But in areas where you have high disturbance, as number of buildings increases, the bird abundance also increases. And that's likely because in those areas, the birds are taking advantage of the buildings. They're using the buildings as cover. They're using the buildings as foraging platforms. And that makes it makes them more visible. Now, the same thing also when we look at species richness. In species richness, we see that shrub density. So as the density of shrubs increases, you find that the abundance or the richness of birds increases. And we see that the steepness of the slope is much more stronger in the low disturbance area. That's the blue line. Shows that in areas where you have less disturbance and you have high density of richness, you have a corresponding increase in the shrub density, you have a corresponding increase in bird richness. But in high disturbance areas, the slope is almost flat. So it's almost as if the increase in shrub density does not really influence bird richness. And that's likely because in those areas, because shrubs are relatively short, and because of the constant movement of cars and people around, most birds would prefer to go high up on buildings, stay up high up on buildings than to use vegetation. And strangely, in this part of Lagos, there are quite a number of species that we recorded. So you have, for example, curlews, wimbrels. You have the common moorhens, the red-eyed doves, Senegal parrots, great egrets, and there's a large population of white-faced whistling ducks that we have in this part. This is one part of Lagos where you find a large congregation of white-faced whistling ducks. And that just goes to also support the point I had made before, that tertiary institutions, because they retain some of the natural components of the vegetation, they are able to serve as reservoirs or refugia for many bird species. Now, here in Lagos also, you find that urban greening is a common practice. In fact, the Lagos state government is very, very passionate about this. And across the entire state, you have 212 green spaces that have been established. But the challenge I have with many of these green spaces is that if you look at the type of trees that you have there, they are mostly exotic trees that you find in these places. And good enough, there's quite a lot of maintenance, because for many of these green spaces, they also serve as leisure parks or tourism areas for people. And so we wanted to see whether these urban green spaces, whether they have any potential contribution to bird species conservation in Lagos State. And so we sampled 16 out of the urban green spaces that we have in Lagos State. We sampled 16 of them, and to see what potential they have for bird species. And in this particular study, we found that the most abundant, amongst the foraging guilds, the guilds that you have within this that are supported in these urban green spaces, you have the insectivores, we have nectarivores, we have omnivores. These are the top three guilds that we find mostly within these environment. So insects, granivores, find a bit of granivores also, doves, pigeons, the columbiforms. We also find lots of insectivores, common bulbuls, cattle egrets, several other species that feed on insects, making up this. And there are quite a number of sunbirds also that we recorded in this area. So even though the intention of the state, the state for setting up these urban green spaces was just for greening purposes, we found evidence that yes, it also contributes to sustaining bird species. And the shrub abundance also, as the density of shrubs, the number of shrubs increases, you also have increase in species richness. You also have distance to road. So the further away the park or the garden is from the nearest road, the higher the number of species that you find. So we found evidence that in designing urban green spaces, one of the very important factors that should be taken into consideration is that buffer of human activity, creating a buffer such that the urban green space is not too close to the road where vehicular traffic and human traffic can disturb bird species breeding or even foraging. So we found evidence that when you isolate urban green spaces from road networks, they tend to support more bird species. Now, we try to extend this study on the landscape of urban areas to the southwestern part of Nigeria. And in this particular study, we looked at how urban infrastructure, pedestrian traffic, vegetation cover, how it influences bird composition. And the focus for us was to look at Ibadan, which is the West Africa's biggest city. And in this place, we selected 100 random grids of 500 by 500 meters. And within each 500 by 500 meters, we established 5 point stations of 200 meters apart to be able to survey bird species and see how the urban infrastructure, pedestrian traffic, and vegetation cover in these areas, how it influences bird composition. And one of the things that we found, unlike the study in Lagos, unlike the study that we conducted in Lagos, where we looked at the urban green spaces, trees are an important predictor for bird richness in Ibadan. Here in Lagos, we didn't find trees as important predictors. Rather, we found shrubs as important predictors. And so here we find that trees are important predictors. So as the number of trees increases, you have increase in the number of species that we encounter. We also found that a negative trend, negative relationship for the relationship between pedestrian traffic and the bird richness. So recall that we have seen in the previous study, we reported that proximity to the road is an important driver of bird richness. Here we are saying that beyond just proximity to the road, the number of pedestrians passing by the green space can also be a factor to take into consideration, because as the number of pedestrians increases, you find that species richness declines. Now, within urban areas, there are lots of interesting ecological interactions that occur. Now, many of us that grew up in the north would recall that a common occurrence would be that when you move around, when you see cows, the Fulanis herding their cattle, you would occasionally find cattle egrets grazing along with them. Now, in urban areas, we also have cattle egrets, but in most urban areas, we don't have cows that are grazing. Now, the question is this mutualistic behavior that we find in between cattle, the cows and the cattle egret, does it also play out with mowers and cattle egrets? Because one of the very common occurrence that we have noticed is that when more lawns are being mowed, when gardens are being mowed, most frequently you will find cattle egrets grazing around the mower. So it's like a simulation of the natural system that you have, where the cow is grazing, the cattle egret is grazing along the cows. Here you have, so the question is there some kind of mutualistic relationship that is existing in this case? And we thought of investigating this. And one thing which we know is that many urban green spaces are mostly managed for aesthetics. They are managed for aesthetics. So you have frequent mowing to make them look good, to make them look nice, green. The mowing, the management of these parks, these gardens is not, in many instances, it's a bit anthropocentric, just for human aesthetics, not even taking into consideration the other biodiversity that may be using it. And so one important question that we were trying to answer was, how does vegetation management, how does it influence the foraging success of insectivorous birds in urban areas? So like you find here, this mower is mowing and then you have some cattle egrets hanging around. So how does this practice of constantly mowing these lawns, how does it influence the foraging success of this species? And in this study, which was conducted at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, we used the cattle egret as a model species because we wanted to look at that mutualistic relationship between the mower and the cattle egret. And we sampled several lawns and grasslands that are mowed, that are managed. The management system is either by mowing, so you have mechanized process, or using cutlass. So we wanted to see whether these two different management processes, whether they have any influence on the foraging success. And we estimated arthropods, the abundance of flying arthropods and crawling arthropods, so using sweep nets and also pitfall traps. And what we found in the results was that machine-cleared areas that are cleared with machines, so you have a mower, the foraging success of cattle egrets was much more high. Foraging success of cattle egrets was higher than the foraging success on areas that were manually maintained. So which means that the process of clearing this vegetation, as the mower is clearing the vegetation, because the mower is moving at a relatively constant pace, you have insects are being displaced, and that creates foraging opportunities for the cattle egrets. We also found that the percentage ground cover, so the height of the grass, the height of the grass was also an important factor. So which means that the the number of days after mowing was also an important factor for determining whether there is some benefit that the cattle egret derives from the mowing process or not. And what we saw was that as vegetation height increases, as the grasses begin to recover, the cattle egrets, their foraging success declines. And on the other hand, also, as arthropod abundance increases, so as you have more arthropods, you have foraging success increases. And one thing which is very interesting is that 1 week, the highest foraging success was obtained 1 week after mowing. So 1 week after, if a lawn has been mowed, 1 week after, the cattle egrets had the highest foraging success. If it were 1 day after, you have almost a negative foraging success. So it means that negative foraging success is likely that some of the insects are not some of the arthropods that are displaced are either have been killed by the mower itself, or that the cattle egrets, because of the presence of the human mowing, they are not able to access all of the displaced arthropods. But if that lawn had been mowed, say 1 week ago, they had a higher foraging success. And then the foraging success declines as the weeks progresses. Mind you, you would know that as the week progresses, it means that the vegetation would be recovering. And from this graph here, we have shown that as vegetation height reduces, as it increases rather, you have foraging success decline. Now, one other thing which we went on to, which we have tried to investigate, is the urban areas are structurally complex. They're structurally complex because you have areas with dense buildings or densely packed buildings. You have some other areas with sparsely distributed buildings. So the distribution of buildings in urban areas is not the same. And also, when we look at it from a gradient perspective, that if you move from rural to semi-urban to urban areas, how the structural complexity changes. And also, one important aspect of urban areas is noise. Vehicular traffic generates noise, generators, industries, facilities, there's lots of noise. So the question for us was, how do birds respond to these structural complexity and urban noise? And what we found is that bird abundance was highest in rural areas that were surveyed compared to urban areas. So as you move from rural to urban areas, bird abundance declines. It declines. The same thing also as you move from rural to urban areas. So mind you, this study was conducted in Jos, and it was conducted across across different parts of the Jos metropolis that covers both the rural, the suburban, and the urban areas. And you would see that the pattern for bird abundance and richness is the same, that it declines as you move from rural areas to urban areas. So which means that as an area becomes more structurally complex, bird abundance can also decline. As the area becomes structurally complex, where in terms of buildings, the types of buildings, the structure of buildings, the bird abundance, bird richness can also decline. Now, if we relate it to noise, we see that noise level is lowest in rural areas, but highest in urban areas. Physical structures also are lowest in rural areas and highest in urban areas. It therefore means that the negative pattern that we were seeing, from rural to urban in terms of abundance and richness is most likely a response to both anthropogenic noise and physical structures. That as you have more built up areas, as the land cover is being transformed into built up areas, concrete roads, concrete surfaces, you have less resources being available to bird species. Now, in rounding up this presentation, I'll just mention also that we have also attempted to look at what other behavioral responses can urban bird species put up. And one thing which is interesting to note is that urban areas, because of the pedestrian traffic, because of the density of humans, and because humans we wear different clothing of different colors. So we were interested in seeing whether birds respond to the color of our clothing. So if you have different persons moving about with different clothing color, how do urban birds respond to them? And we use the concept of flight initiation distance, which is the distance at which a bird begins to escape by either walking rapidly away or taking flight. And we tested 4 different colors: red, black, green, and white, to see how would bird species respond to these colors. And the model species that we used in this case was the cattle egret, because this is a species that readily forages on lawns. So we can select certain lawns or gardens or parks and then just experimentally test this. And what we found is that birds are conscious of colors, that red color is the one that triggers escape behavior early. So birds respond to red clothing earlier than they respond to someone wearing black. In fact, someone wearing black would almost be about 5 meters away from the bird, from the cattle egret, before it takes off. But a person wearing red would be about 10 meters away, on average, 10 meters away, and the cattle egret is already initiating escape. If a person is wearing green, it's almost still about 5, green or white, still about 5 meters away. Now, there are different hypotheses that have been put forward for this. You have the concealment hypothesis, and then you have so the concealment hypothesis is that birds will readily respond to colors that are different from their own plumage. So they will readily respond to a color that is different from their own plumage. They quickly take to flight. So this is just one experimental study that we have shown, which also shows that beyond the physical structures, beyond the number of trees that we have in urban systems, even attributes as simple as clothing color can also have impact on bird species behavior. So the conclusion for this study is that urbanization is not entirely bad for bird species. The reason why I say so is that many bird species have been able to adapt. So you find, in fact, a few weeks ago, I saw, I had a video, I had a recording of a hornbill that was nesting in a hole on a building. So there was this hole, there was this crevice in the building where the cable for an AC had been passed, and there was a female hornbill nesting inside. The male brought food to her at that point. So it's not entirely bad, and the reason why it's not entirely bad because these bird species have now been able to take advantage of the telecom masts that we have in cities, that taking advantage of the buildings, the top of buildings, the roof of buildings. But it is still important to note that not all species can take advantage of these artificial surfaces or artificial structures. There are some species that still require trees and vegetation. And as such, retaining native trees would be an important contribution for urban birds and biodiversity conservation. Now, what we have also been able to show in the studies we've done is that well-planned urban green spaces are important. Planning of our urban green spaces are important, and these urban spaces must integrate natural elements into them. So it's not enough to just have a green space where you have exotic flowers. We must also plant natural or the native plants. And then we must buffer the green spaces from pedestrian traffic and anthropogenic noise, because all of these can have long-term implications on the fitness of many of the bird species that we have within urban areas. So I'd like to acknowledge all the students who have led the research for this work: Moses, Yusuf, Carlos, Matthew, Suleiman, and Shubobi. And also acknowledge the support we received from Aplori, from LASPAC, from the University of Cape Coast, and also from the University of Lagos. So I thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shola, for the wonderful presentation. That's very exciting, considering the fact that most people do otherwise research in bird studies. So it's good to know something that's going on with regards to urban bird ecology and conservation. So please feel free to drop your questions on the chat box or speak. And I think we have a question from Professor Abokan. It is posted on the chat box. So on the cattle egret clothing color experiment, was the response variable based on a single or multiple group bird responses?
Okay, so the response in this case was based on, so what we were testing is that we're looking at the distance. So we had one person who wore different clothing on different days. So that was the person that constantly approached the birds. And so we were looking at what distance, and so we were measuring the distance to nearest. We had also distance to the nearest tree, because if a bird, for example, is close to cover, if a bird is close to the cover, it's most likely that it may not escape very quickly. But a bird that is far away from cover, that does not have a place to quickly hide, might take off very quickly. So we had those other variables that were measured. We had also the start distance, the distance at which we start approaching. We have also the distance at which the bird begins to becomes alert to our approach. And so those are the other variables that we had in the experiment. But the point of that particular result that I had shown was just looking at how flight initiation distance, how it varied with the different colors of clothing, the average distance that the birds took off with respect to the different clothing color.
You can go on Dr. Abukan. I think he wants to say something again.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing, I think the cattle egrets, they like forage in groups, right?
Yes, occasionally they forage in groups. Sometimes you find single individuals. So we were only focusing on so if we had a group of birds, we focused on one. So
okay, that's what I was interested in.
Yeah.
You just target one of them. Okay.
Yes,
that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I also think naturally, if our birds are foraging in group, once one bird take off, others will just
most likely
take off too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because they sense danger or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions? So Dr. Iwajomo, you mentioned that there are 212 urban green spaces in Lagos.
Yes.
And from your presentation, most of these green spaces have exotic trees. So
yes.
What efforts are being made to, like, someone is joining now, it's already late here. So what efforts are being made to ensure that the trees that are being planted are native trees?
So you see, the challenge with urban greening is that people often, or authorities often, want trees that can quickly grow.
Yeah.
You know, for political reasons, we want to show that we have been able to plant trees and we have been able to. So having trees that will take longer time to grow is not always. There's no incentive to having such trees. There are, however, a few places, a few of the parks that have some native trees, and those places are usually they were not created. They are not urban green spaces that were created. So among the 212 green spaces, some of them were created. So the ones that had native exotic trees were mostly the ones that were created. And they make up a larger proportion of the urban green spaces that we have.
Okay, so the ones that still have some of the indigenous trees are like remnants of the natural
remnants of natural vegetations that we have.
Okay, Dr. Oladiru, you raise your hand.
Dr. Laleru. Okay,
and she's not muted.
Oh.
We can't hear you, Dr. Laleru.
We can't hear you.
Oh, you say you can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, yes. We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. I said I want to thank Dr. Iwajomo for making out time to make this webinar as our facilitator for this month. We are very grateful. I said this is not a vote of thanks time, but I just want to make use of the opportunity before another engagement calls my attention. I'm sorry to have not been at the beginning, okay, or when you started, but we are grateful. I want to recognize the presence of Professor Jerome and Professor Agbokan and Professor, is it Tanko Ayuba? I say Tanko Ayuba, Professor Tanko and others that are on the call. I just want to pass this vital information on to us. I don't know where the moderator will buttress it. One of the information I want to pass to us is the issue of our membership. We have reviewed our membership to start giving membership ID cards, and the membership identity number, sorry, not ID card. We are giving membership identity number. As you pay your annual dues, you are issued a number, but that number becomes yours as a member of NSCB. It becomes your number identification. It's not every year that you pay, we give you that number. No. For this time that we are starting, we are giving each person that pays their annual due their identity number. So if you are a member of NSCB and you have not paid your annual dues for 2025, I implore you to do so, so that we can secretary will post you your identity number. Then another thing I want to bring to our attention is our conference. 2025 is another year that we are planning for. We should have our conference. With the last conference we had was in 2023. So we've been requesting for institutions that will collaborate with us to host the event. No institution has shown up since the deadline of February, is it February 15 or January? February 15. It was to be 31st December, January. So we pushed it by 2 weeks, but no institution or nobody indicated interest. So we have still not given hope, because perhaps if the institution you are interested, you are still collaborating with your HOD to get his final feedback. But we are still waiting that we will have somebody that will indicate, or an institution that will indicate interest. We collaborate, we run the conference, we should be able to share some of the benefits of the conference with the institution that hosts the conference. And of course, when you host a conference, it increases the visibility of your institution, because it is going to be advertised. So it on a conference on the web site, or people will be trafficking to that site or to that institution. So it brings your institution into visibility. So, and thirdly, I want to tell us about the International Congress for Conservation Biology. It's taking place in Australia this June, 15th to 19th of June. So if you are interested in attending, the early bird registration closes on April, is it 14 of April 15. I posted that information on our society's WhatsApp platform. So these are the few vital informations I want to share with us. The Vice President may have other things he wants to share, but I just want to thank each and every one of us that made us time to attend this webinar for this month, and we welcome intending presenters to liaise with us so that we can schedule you for any of the months we'll be having the webinar. Thank you very much, and bye.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Laliru. Professor Tanko, I saw your hand raised up before the president talk. Prof, you can say something. Maybe you wanted to ask something. Is he still with us? Maybe Professor Tanko.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I saw your hand raised up.
Go ahead.
Okay, okay. So do we have more questions? If we don't have more questions, I think that's all we have for today. And we thank everyone for attending, for joining us today. And we thank you, Dr. Iwajomo, for that excellent presentation. We really learned a lot.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, so we look forward to the next bi-monthly webinar series coming up in May. So we wish everyone a happy afternoon or evening, depending on where you are joining us today. Dr. Raji, our able secretary, do you have something to add with regard to some of the information we have at the NSCB? Dr. Raji? Okay, so I think we don't have anything to add, so we just call it a day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor Tanko.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.